The first-time wildlife biology student Ellie Matthews encountered the soft padding of paws circling her remote research station at dawn. She thought the mountain silence was finally playing tricks on her mind after another sleepless night analyzing tracking data in the isolated Oregon wilderness. The sound that made her pause between equipment checks wasn't the usual symphony of wind through Douglas firs or the distant calls of morning birds. It was something cautious, something moving with purpose against the harsh backdrop of winter's approach and the unforgiving terrain of the Cascade Range. Her tired eyes tracked toward the supply cache, where the sound seemed to originate. And there, partially hidden behind weathered storage containers, golden eyes blazed with intelligence and wariness, despite obvious hunger and the desperation that comes with facing winter alone. In that suspended moment between observation and intervention, Ellie felt the weight of choice settle in her chest. The ancient decision between scientific detachment and compassionate action that every researcher faces when confronted with suffering beyond their designated study parameters. What she couldn't know then was that this single encounter would alter the trajectory of two lives forever, binding one dedicated student and one orphaned wild predator in a connection that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the boundaries between human observation and animal trust. If you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Ellie Matthews had been conducting field research in the remote sections of Oregon's Cascade Range for 3 months, but she'd never encountered anything quite like the scene that greeted her during the early hours of that November morning. Her wildlife behavior study had been progressing smoothly through the autumn, documenting predator movement patterns and territorial behaviors, when an unexpected visitor began appearing at the edges of her research perimeter. The November mornings in the high country had turned brutally cold, transforming the mountain research station into an isolated outpost where survival required careful planning and constant vigilance against the approaching winter. As a graduate student who had spent the last 2 years preparing for this independent research project, Ellie had developed an instinct for recognizing when wildlife behavior indicated distress or unusual circumstances that might affect her data collection. What she hadn't expected was to find herself being observed by a young bobcat, approximately 4 months old by her estimate, clearly operating without the guidance of its mother, and struggling with the dual challenges of inexperience and the harsh mountain environment approaching winter. The kitten's tawny coat showed the healthy thickness of autumn preparation, but its behavior patterns indicated confusion and isolation that made every passing day a potential threat to survival. Amber eyes tracked Ellie's movements with the intense focus of a predator, but there was something heartbreaking about the young bobcat's obvious uncertainty. Its small head tilted with curiosity rather than the immediate flight response typical of wild cats, and its attempts to maintain appropriate distance were inconsistent with what appeared to be desperate hunger and social confusion. "Easy there, little one," Ellie murmured, her voice carrying the calm authority she'd learned from her wildlife behavior professors. "You're supposed to be with your mother, aren't you?" Ellie had observed countless wildlife interactions during her academic career, but approaching an orphaned wild predator presented unique challenges that her textbooks had only covered in theoretical terms. The young bobcat was clearly in distress and likely confused about appropriate survival behaviors, making it unpredictable despite its relatively small size. Every instinct the animal possessed would normally be telling it to avoid human contact, but with its mother nowhere to be found, Ellie realized she was observing a creature with a disrupted survival support system. But there was something in those golden eyes, a combination of intelligence and desperate need that reminded her of the most vulnerable subjects she'd studied, those young animals who were struggling to understand environmental challenges beyond their developmental experience. The bobcat wasn't just hungry, It was completely alone in facing the winter survival challenges that required maternal teaching. Moving slowly and deliberately, Ellie adjusted her observation protocols, thinking this might provide an unprecedented opportunity to document unusual human-wildlife interaction while addressing an obvious animal welfare situation. Her plan was straightforward in concept, but emotionally complex in execution. Somehow provide assistance without disrupting natural behaviors, then document what happened when scientific boundaries met compassionate intervention. "I know you're scared," Ellie continued. Her voice, maintaining the gentle tone she'd learned, was crucial when working around wildlife that couldn't understand human intentions. "But you're going to need help if you want to make it through winter." The young bobcat's response was cautious but encouraging. Instead of fleeing, it remained positioned near the research station, watching Ellie's approach with wary interest. Whether due to hunger or some instinctive recognition that this human represented potential resources rather than threat, the bobcat allowed Ellie to move closer than any experienced wild cat normally would. The next few minutes unfolded like a careful negotiation between species. Ellie moved incrementally closer, speaking continuously in soft, reassuring tones while keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. The bobcat watched every step, its breathing rapid, but its attention focused entirely on Ellie's approach rather than seeking immediate escape routes. When Ellie was close enough to see the full extent of the young cat's condition, obvious hunger signs, the slightly desperate alertness that indicated several days of unsuccessful hunting, and behavior patterns that suggested social isolation, she made her decision. Rather than trying to approach the frightened animal directly, she returned to her supply cache and retrieved some of the dried meat from her emergency rations. "Come on, Sage," Ellie said, surprising herself by giving the bobcat a name that seemed to fit its thoughtful, observant nature. "I've got food that might help, but you have to decide if you trust me enough to take it." The bobcat's initial hesitation lasted several long minutes, but hunger and curiosity eventually overcame wild caution. Moving slowly and ready to bolt at any sudden movement, the small predator approached the food Ellie had placed at a respectful distance, sniffed cautiously, then began eating with the focused intensity of an animal that hadn't had a successful hunt in days. Watching Sage eat, Ellie began documenting what was becoming an extraordinary research opportunity, while considering the complex logistics of providing assistance to a wild predator without disrupting its natural development or creating dangerous dependency behaviors. "What are you doing out there, Ellie?" her research advisor, Dr. Patricia Coleman, asked during their weekly radio check-in when Ellie mentioned her unusual visitor. "Documenting an unprecedented interaction," Ellie replied, carefully positioning her observation notes where she could monitor Sage's continued presence near the research station. "A juvenile bobcat has been approaching the station regularly. Mother's nowhere to be seen, and it's clearly struggling with winter preparation." The next several days established a routine that challenged everything Ellie had learned about appropriate researcher-wildlife boundaries. Sage began appearing regularly near the research station, initially just to investigate the food offerings Ellie provided, but gradually showing signs of what could only be described as recognition and cautious trust toward her human benefactor. What made the situation extraordinary was Sage's behavior patterns. Rather than becoming dependent or losing natural wariness, she seemed to understand that Ellie represented temporary assistance during a survival crisis. She would accept food and even tolerate close observation, but maintained hunting behaviors and territorial awareness that indicated her wild instincts remained intact. "I've never documented anything quite like this," Ellie wrote in her research journal. "She's accepting assistance without becoming domesticated. It's almost as if she understands that this is a temporary survival strategy rather than a permanent lifestyle change." As Sage grew more comfortable around the research station, Ellie faced the reality that approaching winter would present challenges that her current assistants couldn't address. Through her contacts in the wildlife biology community, she learned about the complex legal and ethical considerations involved in wildlife intervention, particularly with predator species that could become dangerous if they lost appropriate fear of humans. Dr. Coleman had worked extensively with wildlife rehabilitation programs and provided guidance on proper protocols for Sage's situation. More importantly, she helped Ellie understand that their unusual relationship could provide valuable scientific data about wildlife adaptation and human-animal interaction under controlled conditions. When Dr. Coleman visited the research station to assess Sage's condition and provide guidance on appropriate intervention strategies, her evaluation was both encouraging and complex. "She's definitely been on her own for several weeks," Dr. Coleman confirmed after observing Sage's interactions with Ellie and her continued wild behaviors. "Probably around 4 months old, which means she was just beginning to learn independent hunting when something happened to interrupt her maternal education." The assessment revealed that Sage's situation was more complex than simple orphaning. Her hunting skills were developing appropriately for her age, but she lacked the refined techniques and seasonal knowledge that would normally be provided through extended maternal instruction. Without this education, her chances of surviving the harsh mountain winter were significantly reduced. The question, Dr. Coleman continued as she documented Sage's behavioral patterns, is whether we can provide supplemental support while maintaining her wild nature and hunting development. This could be valuable research if we document everything properly. Ellie found herself making a commitment that transformed her research project. Whatever she needs to succeed on her own terms, we'll figure it out. She didn't choose this situation, and she deserves the chance to develop into the predator she's meant to become. For the next several weeks, Sage remained near the research station, receiving supplemental feeding and behavioral observation while demonstrating remarkable adaptation to her unusual circumstances. Ellie adjusted her research focus to include detailed documentation of human-wildlife cooperation, while ensuring that Sage retained her natural behaviors and hunting instincts. The most remarkable aspect of Sage's development was her response to Ellie's presence. While maintaining appropriate wildness around other potential threats, Sage seemed to understand that Ellie represented safety and resources during her learning period. She would emerge from her hiding spots when Ellie appeared for observation sessions and showed what could only be described as recognition and measured trust toward her human partner. "I've studied human-wildlife interaction for 20 years," Dr. Coleman observed during one of her follow-up visits, "and I've never seen anything quite like this relationship. She's accepting assistance without losing her essential wildness. It's extraordinary documentation of adaptive behavior under unique circumstances." As Sage grew stronger and more skilled at hunting, Ellie documented behaviors that indicated the young Bobcat was preparing for increased independence. She began making longer hunting expeditions away from the research station, returning with evidence of successful kills that demonstrated her developing predatory skills. But the approach of winter presented new challenges that would test both Sage's survival abilities and the unusual relationship she'd formed with Ellie. When an early blizzard struck the research area, creating conditions that would challenge even experienced mountain wildlife, Sage made a choice that surprised everyone involved in her situation. Instead of seeking shelter in her usual territory, Sage approached Ellie's research station during the storm and remained close to the heated structure throughout the 3-day weather emergency. Rather than showing dependency, her behavior suggested she understood that temporary shelter sharing represented practical survival strategy rather than abandonment of her wild nature. "This is unprecedented," Ellie documented as Sage waited out the blizzard near the research station while maintaining her alertness and wild behaviors. She's using human resources strategically while retaining all her natural instincts and independence. The storm marked a turning point in their relationship. When conditions improved, Sage resumed her normal patterns of hunting and territorial exploration. But her willingness to accept Ellie's presence during crisis situations established a unique form of interspecies cooperation that challenged traditional assumptions about wildlife-human boundaries. Word of Ellie's documentation began attracting attention from wildlife researchers and conservation organizations interested in her findings about adaptive behavior and strategic resource utilization by wild predators. Her detailed behavioral records provided insights into wildlife intelligence and flexibility that had rarely been observed under such controlled conditions. However, not all attention was positive. When local wildlife authorities learned about Sage's regular presence near the research station, they expressed concerns about potential habituation and the legal implications of uncontrolled wildlife interaction. Ellie found herself navigating complex regulations and defending her research protocols while ensuring Sage's safety and continued development. The key issue, explained Wildlife Officer Mark Stevens during his investigation of the situation, is whether this animal is becoming habituated to humans in ways that could create future problems. If she loses her natural wariness, she could become dangerous or require permanent captivity. Ellie's detailed documentation proved crucial in demonstrating that Sage had not become habituated in problematic ways. Her behavioral records showed that the young bobcat maintained appropriate wariness around all humans except Ellie, continued developing normal hunting and territorial behaviors, and used human resources strategically rather than dependently. Dr. Coleman's professional assessment supported Ellie's observations. This animal has maintained all essential wild characteristics while demonstrating remarkable adaptive intelligence. Rather than becoming dependent, she's learned to utilize available resources while retaining her natural behaviors and instincts. The authorities ultimately approved continued observation under strict protocols that required detailed documentation of all interactions and regular professional assessment of Sage's behavioral development. Ellie's research project had evolved into a unique study of wildlife adaptation and intelligence under controlled conditions. If you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. As winter progressed, Sage's behavior patterns provided unprecedented insights into bobcat intelligence and adaptability. She established regular hunting circuits that took her away from the research station for days at a time, returning with evidence of successful predation that demonstrated her growing expertise as an independent hunter. But she also continued choosing to weather severe storms near Ellie's station, suggesting she understood the strategic value of temporary resource sharing during extreme conditions, while maintaining her essential wildness during normal circumstances. This pattern challenged traditional assumptions about wildlife behavior and human-animal relationships. What we're seeing, Dr. Coleman explained to the Wildlife Biology Conference where Ellie presented her initial findings, is evidence of remarkable cognitive flexibility in a species we thought we understood completely. This animal has created a survival strategy that incorporates human resources without compromising her wild nature. Spring brought new developments in Sage's behavior as she established expanded territory and showed signs of approaching maturity. Her hunting expeditions became longer and more successful, but she continued returning to check on Ellie's research activities, suggesting their relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship rather than dependency. The most remarkable confirmation of Sage's successful development came when wildlife cameras documented her interacting appropriately with other bobcats in the area, displaying normal territorial and social behaviors that indicated she had successfully integrated human cooperation into her natural behavioral repertoire without losing essential wildness. Perfect outcome, Dr. Coleman observed as they reviewed footage of Sage demonstrating normal predator behaviors with other wildlife. She's retained everything essential for wild success while developing problem-solving abilities that actually enhance her survival prospects. Follow-up monitoring over the next several months confirmed that Sage had successfully established herself as a competent predator in her mountain territory. Trail cameras regularly captured images of her hunting, patrolling, and exhibiting all the natural behaviors that indicated successful adaptation to independent wild living. But the most meaningful confirmation of her successful development came when Sage began showing signs of establishing breeding territory and displaying normal mating behaviors. The orphaned kitten who had appeared desperate and confused at Ellie's research station had not only survived, but was thriving and potentially contributing to the next generation of her species. The relationship between Ellie and Sage continued to evolve as both moved forward in their respective lives. Sage maintained her pattern of occasional visits to the research area, but these became less frequent as her territory expanded and her life became fully integrated into the wild ecosystem. Ellie's documentation of their relationship became groundbreaking research that influenced wildlife management policies and understanding of predator intelligence. Her detailed records provided evidence that wildlife could adapt to human presence in ways that enhanced rather than compromised their natural abilities. Years later, when colleagues asked Ellie about her most significant research findings, she would tell Sage's story, not just as an example of wildlife adaptability, but as a demonstration of the extraordinary outcomes possible when human observation, combined with respect for natural processes and genuine commitment to animal welfare. The research station where Ellie had continued her studies remained focused on wildlife behavior documentation, but Sage's story had influenced how researchers approached wildlife interaction protocols. The biology department now had guidelines for beneficial intervention that balanced animal welfare with scientific integrity, creating frameworks for ethical wildlife research. Most importantly, Sage had taught Ellie that wild animals were not just subjects for academic study, but individuals with unique personalities, intelligence, and capacity for adaptive problem-solving that extended far beyond traditional behavioral assumptions. Her successful development had demonstrated the remarkable flexibility of wildlife when provided with appropriate support and respect for their natural instincts. The mountain wilderness where Ellie had found Sage remained largely unchanged, a pristine ecosystem where predators and prey maintained the ancient balance that supported healthy wildlife populations. But for Ellie, that location would forever represent the moment when academic observation expanded into personal connection, when she discovered that scientific understanding could be enhanced rather than compromised by emotional investment in research subjects. Their story inspired others as well. Sage's adaptation became part of educational programs at universities and wildlife management agencies, illustrating the positive outcomes possible when human intervention respected natural processes while providing strategic assistance during survival crises. Students who heard her tale often asked how they could contribute to wildlife research, creating ripple effects of conservation awareness that extended far beyond individual animal success stories. If you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. The orphaned bobcat who had nearly faced starvation and exposure had become a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and the power of respectful human-wildlife cooperation. Her story continued to inspire wildlife researchers, support conservation education, and demonstrate that individual animals possessed remarkable adaptive abilities when approached with knowledge, respect, and genuine commitment to their natural development. Ellie's decision to provide assistance rather than maintain strict observational distance had seemed like a departure from traditional research protocols. She couldn't have known then that she was about to document one of the most significant examples of wildlife cognitive flexibility ever recorded, and that her relationship with Sage would contribute to new understanding of predator intelligence and adaptive behavior. The emergency rations Ellie had used to feed Sage that first morning remained part of her standard research equipment, a reminder of the day when academic training met wildlife need and compassion enhanced rather than compromised scientific understanding. They represented the possibility of research that benefited both human knowledge and animal welfare, the potential for individual wildlife to inspire broader conservation awareness, and the extraordinary outcomes possible when respect for natural processes guided human intervention. In the end, the young bobcat who had been found struggling in the Oregon wilderness had become an ambassador for her species, proof that with appropriate support and respect for natural development, even vulnerable wildlife could adapt to challenging circumstances while retaining their essential wildness. Her successful integration into wildlife was a testament to the intelligence of wildlife, the importance of preserving natural habitat, and the extraordinary contributions that field researchers could make when they chose to balance scientific observation with ethical animal welfare considerations. The Mountain Research Station, where Ellie continued her wildlife studies, remained focused on behavioral documentation, but Sage's story had influenced how the scientific community approached wildlife interaction protocols. The university now had policies for beneficial research that considered animal welfare alongside data collection, creating networks of ethically trained researchers who understood that scientific knowledge could be enhanced through respectful cooperation with wildlife subjects. Sage's legacy extended far beyond her successful adaptation, rippling outward through research publications, conservation initiatives, and the countless students who had been inspired by her story of survival, intelligence, and the extraordinary relationships that could develop when humans chose respect over detachment and honored the remarkable capabilities of the wildlife they were privileged to study and protect. If you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.